Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for this discussion of hope and opportunity inspired by the pollinators and people right here in our city. I wanted to start the evening by acknowledging that we're on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands and territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and are honored to be here tonight, as well as to work alongside those nations and other nations here in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I have the pleasure of introducing Mark Winston up to the podium tonight. Mark will be guiding us through this conversation for the duration of the evening. Mark is a professor and senior fellow at the SFU Center for Dialogue. He's also the author of 2015's Governor General Award for Nonfiction for his book, Bee Time, Lessons from the Hive. So I have just the most confidence in welcoming Mark up to the podium. I met him in 2012 after our first Hive. And we came up, me and my mom, we came up to his office and talked a lot. And Mark listened. We kept on talking, just like so excited about opportunities and what we could do and how we could connect this one hive out into the city. And he continued to listen, and then he asked us what he could do to help. And really, from that moment on, he's been a mentor to us. He's supported us. He's shared our story as he's traveled with his book. And yeah, thank you, Mark, and please welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. What a pleasure to be here tonight. I want to tell you, I've been in the bee world for 40 years. And up until about 10 years ago, an evening like this, maybe there would be 4 or 5 of you out in the audience. And most of those would be asleep within 5 minutes. But it's such a pleasure to see so many of you. And I've been thinking a lot lately about why so many people are coming out to these bee meetings, particularly around in cities. I was just in the city of Winnipeg at the Winnipeg Writers Festival last week, and person after person kept coming up to me telling me how the city of Winnipeg is putting so many barriers up against pollinators. And they gave me 2 reasons. One was the stated reason, which was they were terrified because people were getting stung, might get stung, which is extremely unlikely. But the other reason is that they spray pesticides once a week to kill mosquitoes. And if they want to keep that spraying going, they have to kind of turn a blind eye to the health of bees. And it reminded me of just how fortunate we are to be in Vancouver at this time with a city government that is amazingly supportive of urban agriculture in a time when people are becoming so aware of the importance of bees in the environment, and in which beekeeping with honeybees is exploding, but awareness of the importance of wild bees is similarly explosive. And so we're finally getting a full picture of the importance of pollinators mixed in with a deep concern that we all have about growing good, healthy food, and particularly with urban agriculture here in the cities. And I'm sure each of you has a reason why you're here tonight, but my guess is that many of you are here because of you've developed a passion for bees and understanding of their significance in the city, and really want to do what you can to protect pollinators and to grow the idea that cities can be very natural places as well. So I'm just really thrilled to see such a crowd. And it's also a testament to Hives for Humanity, I think, which is one of the sponsors of the evening tonight. This is the amazing work that they've been doing in and around the downtown east side of Vancouver and into other neighborhoods. When I did meet Sarah and Julia, they did come into my office. They did talk a lot. They were just so enthusiastic. They were so excited. And I did listen, because that's really what I do. I listen. And it didn't take long for me to hear what I thought was most important, was that here were 2 people. One hive was all they had, and a dream and a vision. And I saw the possibility that they could really make Hives for Humanity something like there is nothing like this anywhere in the world. Hives for Humanity is a totally unique thing, and we are so fortunate here in Vancouver to have this program, which has now grown to well over 100 colonies, I think. It's affecting, as you'll hear from Sarah, affecting the lives of many, many people in a very positive way, and just setting an example of what we can do in cities. So my job tonight is to introduce people, and then I'm going to talk a little bit towards the end of the evening, maybe read a little bit from my book, Bee Time, and we'll have a little bit of a chance at the end for a few questions and comments from you in the audience as well. And after the formal part of the program, you'll have a chance to mingle. There'll be some honey tasting, and we certainly encourage you all to stay and keep talking about bees. Just before I move to introductions, I do want to introduce one special person who's here, Anne Giardini, the Chancellor of Simon Fraser University. Yes. Anne has huge demands on her time, and I know she's here for probably many reasons, but one I know about, she's a passionate supporter of pollinators, and it's really great at the university to have somebody who's really at the very top of the university hierarchy sending that message that pollinators are important. So Anne, we're really particularly happy to have you with us tonight. We're going to begin the formal program, with someone who is well known to all of you, Dean Wilson. Dean's a community activist here in the downtown east side. I was introduced to Dean in the 2002 documentary, a film by Nettie Wild called Fix, the Story of an Addicted City, where he shared his own personal battles with addiction, his political fight to bring attention to the suffering that was taking lives in his community, and continues to do so. And he's taken this fight forward, advocating for basic human rights, particularly access to health care and shelter for those living with addiction. He's taken it all the way to the Supreme Court, not once, but twice. And he's still working daily and committed to empowering the voices in the community. His current job, program coordinator of the Portland Hotel Society Drug Users Resource Center, where he facilitates a political action group. Dean, so happy to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, everybody. I'm incredibly ill tonight, so you've got to bear with me a bit. I'm honored to be here. I wouldn't have missed this. Sarah and Julia have meant a lot to me in my life and my life in the downtown east side. I'm going to start off with a reading of Bud Osborne. Bud Osborne was the poet laureate of the downtown east side, but more importantly, Bud was my friend. I'm going to read an excerpt from his poem, No Matter How Vicious the System Is. And life is good if we become for others the brother or sister we may never have had. And life is good if we realize that our lives are not all right. That our lives are, if the lives of others whom we fear are distressed or degraded. And life is good if we can see beyond the reach of the system that our lives depend. So perhaps it is not the worst thing that this system strips us of everything, except what we have in our hearts, for what we are not to be without, what our hearts most deeply desire, love and care. And though we now live grief-stricken and terrorized, so powerful is compassion that it will overcome this global system, this system denying us our full lives. We will overcome because we live differently, that the system intends for us. We live in cooperation and compassion, and we have arisen, we have become alive, and we are resisting. Thank you, Bud. I first watched Sarah, this naive young lady, walk into the Life Skills Center many years ago, and I thought, well, this should be interesting. But she astounded me from the day one. Her compassion, her empathy for us had no bounds. I myself have straightened out my life in the last 5 years. I was a street-entrenched addict for 47 years. I actually hit the magic 60 about a month ago. Never thought I'd make it to 20, let alone 60, let me tell you. But with help from people like Sarah, I turned my life around. And watching this idea of the hives germinate, watching her putting in 50 and 60-hour weeks at our center and still running this program with her mother, seeing it blossom until she actually left our center to go with Hives for Humanity full time. And I actually heard that she's actually going to get a first paycheck or something within the next little bit, which is actually fantastic. 4 years without one, kind of brutal. But to a person, everybody I've seen who's either touched this program or who has been touched by this program has changed. Those little bees pollinate more than flowers. They pollinate our community. And they bring life to our community. What I've seen is just absolutely amazing. It's a good news story, but you never see it printed in the province. They would rather be hysterical about a fentanyl overdose or this new W18 rather than talking about the hundreds and hundreds of lives that have been changed by this little insect, the bee. And it's really astonishing to me that I see super violent addicts walk into that garden and you can just see them change around these hives. And I look and I think, my goodness, why wasn't this done years ago? But it took Sarah and her mother to do this and bring it to our community. And those changes, have made the downtown east side what I think is the greatest community in this city, maybe in this country. I've lived all over the world. I remember living in other places where I got in an elevator in the place I lived and would look at the numbers passing as I went to my floor and would walk in. In our community, nearly everybody knows everybody who lives in their building. Stuff like that is what makes a community. And adding these hives and this pollination and Hives for Humanity has added to this community of the downtown east side. And as I say, I can't say enough about it. While Sarah's helped me personally save my own life, I know that in many ways, the Hives for Humanity has done the same for many, many others. And it's programs like this that we've got to support. I've been an advocate for supervised injections, and you heard that I had fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, where we won 9-0. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Harper wasn't too pleased with us. I actually heard that he called me out by name and said that he hated me. I was incredibly proud of that. But I'm also really proud of Sarah Common, as I say, from that naive young woman who's blossomed into an incredible woman who's changed our community. And from the bottom of my heart, Sarah, I want to say thank you.
Well, my next task is to introduce Sarah, but Dean, I think, has said the most important things. I'll tell you a little bit about her biography. Sarah is a support worker, beekeeper, gardener in the downtown east side, passionate about fostering vibrant and healthy community through both empowerment and education. And she believes profoundly in the impact of connecting individuals and communities to their land, their food, and their spirit. She's been working and building relationships in the downtown east side since 2006, but in 2012 she co-founded Hives for Humanity with her mother, Julia, and in response to, with the overwhelming response from the community, she's continued to embed herself in community life more and more through her work with the bees. She's coordinating partnerships between a variety of organizations and businesses and developing these programs that build self-worth and community pride through the bees. That's the formal part. I'll tell you a couple of other things about Sarah. When I got to know her, let's just say that when she'd get up in front of an audience, magic didn't happen at the start. And in the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, she has grown a voice that is just phenomenal. She has become a speaker of power because she has learned to speak from her heart. And it's just been a remarkable journey for me to watch as Sarah has moved into fully inhabiting this wonderful person that was always there, but I think it took the bees to help her to move into that great place. And I think, Dean's description of what happens when people walk into an apiary, I've experienced this so many times with Hives for Humanity. When people who may be very agitated on the street, they walk into their apiaries and they just slow down. All the tensions, all the chaos, all the voices, whatever's going on, it just goes away, and they just become very calm around the bees. And it's partly the bees, but it's partly being around people like Sarah, who have this wonderful, calm demeanor around them. That maybe Sarah, maybe like myself, you learned a lot of that from the bees. Maybe you were like that all at the start. But I think there's an interaction that we have when we walk into an apiary. If this is your nature, maybe to begin with, being in an apiary really enhances that. And it's something that you pass on to other people. And the wonderful thing about Sarah is that through Hives for Humanity, she has grown this beautiful aspect of her own personality and contributed it to others so that they too are able to find the calmness, the slowness, the presence, to be more aware in their life and to build the kind of community that evolves when you have that opportunity. So, Sarah?
Thank you, Mark and Dean. Thank you so much. So, hello again. I wanted to start just by sharing the story of how we started the first hive in our first garden, and how this little nonprofit, Hives for Humanity, really kind of where it's gone in the last couple of years. Really, it all started over coffee with my mom. We'd been doing coffee dates, and they were nice, but I really felt like I wanted to do something more with her. And I'd gotten to a place working at the Drug Users Resource Center, through that being in a community garden, the Hastings Folk Garden, and really working to try and bring more people into that space, to enliven that space, to engage more of the community and feeling a piece of ownership in that garden. And then I clued into that my mom had been beekeeping for about 35 years, and maybe I could learn something from her about that. And it always shocks me looking back that I never really noted that she was a beekeeper as a girl growing up, as a young woman. There was sort of like one picture of her as a 21-year-old in her beekeeping suit that I was like, oh yeah, nice picture, But she was keeping bees that whole time in other gardens, in other places. And when I finally clued into that, and I realized I could have this opportunity to learn from my mom, and to learn in the context of a community that really otherwise wouldn't have had that opportunity, I really felt like I hit on something. And so I popped her the question over one of our coffee dates. And incredibly, and Mom, wherever you are, I'm so happy that you said yes, because really that was the first yes. And since that yes, we've had so many other people saying yes to us along our way. And whether that was, that first garden, yes, bring in bees, to the 9th therapeutic apiary, yes, bring in bees, to conversations we've been having this week where people are excited about bringing in bees. There's this real power to saying yes to people, and I think that that's one of the things we really work to do. Find a way to say yes, find a way to be creative and flexible, and make something happen. And the bees are such a source of that opportunity. We're in this is this year now in that same garden, but from that one hive, we now have actually about 150, both in gardens throughout Vancouver where we do our neighborhood honey, also in therapeutic settings in the downtown east side, and then also some yards out in Delta where we, do some heavy lifting and make some pounds of honey. So really, it's this environmental work, it's this gardening, this therapeutic gardening, this community gardening, the bees, the pollinators, doing what we can to keep them alive and to grow them and to help them thrive, but it's really immersed in human work and human connectivity, and I really believe, and I think that everything that we're doing as Hives for Humanity is really working to find balance between those two things and to connect the environmental and the human. And I really believe that we can't have one without the other if we're going to save the bees, and all the bees, not just the honeybees, the wild bees that we're going to hear more about later. If we're going to succeed in doing that, we need to have connected human communities that are connected to themselves, that are connected to each other, and then are connected to that nature that surrounds us. So we're always working to tie those two together and to balance those. And that's what we start seeing in our yards is these apiaries that are surrounded by gardens, that are surrounded by other pollinators, that are surrounded by communities, and that are really building interconnections in that community so that somebody who's, would have before been a stranger is now a fellow beekeeper or a fellow gardener, and somebody who before would never have even made eye contact with some of the people who are keeping these bees, now they're making eye contact, now they're learning each other's names, and now we're building bridges through the bees across all kinds of communities. So that's really then the magic of the apiary and this thing that we're always trying to bring into new spaces. Our core work is in the downtown east side of Vancouver. It's with population that is living at risk, that is constantly fighting for their survival, and that has experienced and carries with it like some really heavy, sad trauma. And yet it's a community that is full of skill, full of love, full of creativity, and now full of beekeepers and gardeners who are really stewards of the bees and stewards of the environment and taking leadership roles. And that is something that is empowering, that is moving, and that is really building self-worth with individuals who have spent their life experiencing, being told through, whether it's through, averted eyes, whether it's through government, whether it's through the trauma they've experienced, being told they're not worth anything. And when they get to hold the bees and care for the bees, you realize you are worth something. You're caring for this living, thriving being. And you get to have an impact on that, and you get to support it. So yeah, you are worth something. And I think that that's pretty incredible. And that's not just an experience that people in the downtown east side get to have. That's an experience that people all over the city can have through the bees. I think that disconnection and a lack of self-worth is something that pervades our society, and the bees are providing opportunities for us to grow that self-worth, grow pride in who we are, and connect back to nature and the traditions of gardening and beekeeping. And this is one of the other families, so this is kind of the other spectrum from that garden in the downtown east side, right on Main and Hastings, to backyards throughout Vancouver. Kids, chickens, families, close proximity, neighbors meeting neighbors, and people all over the city experiencing the magic of the bees and the magic of caring for something that's outside of yourself, and how empowering that can be and how moving that can be. We really find that the bees connect people wherever we go. It's being a beekeeper in the city, walking the streets in your veil and your white suit. The conversations that we get to have are so much fun. It's like this immediate identifier, or, I'm driving up Main Street and my smoker's still going, and so my car is filling with smoke, and so then I get to have conversations right on the street with fellow drivers. It's just always creating connections wherever we go, and sharing this story of hope through these incredible insects. What happened really quickly with that first hive is that I thought it was quality time with my mom that I was signing up for, and I knew that it would be unique because it was in this garden, the Hastings Folk Garden, in the heart of the downtown east side. But what happened really quickly, and much more quickly than we expected, was Mom was out of the apiary in 3 weeks or something. There was no more room for her because there was too many beekeepers from the community in the yard. And then pretty quickly after that, there was no room for me. And so then we're leaning on the outside looking into this yard full of beekeepers from the community, teaching each other, teaching their peers. And then, really quickly we start looking around and thinking about the gardens and observing what else is going on in the gardens and what other bees, non-honey bees, bumblebees, mason bees, all kinds of other bees, what's going on in these gardens, and how can we think about supporting those other creatures, those other pollinators? How can we support this diversity of people and of pollinators in our city? And that naturally starts happening. We naturally, wherever we go, if we're going to have bees, there needs to be gardens, and why not plant something people can eat? Why not grow food that also feeds the bees? Why not learn how to grow food that feeds the bees and the people? Why not have therapeutic gardening and therapeutic beekeeping? So it emerges and develops into this really rich spectrum of opportunity where there's a place for everyone. And that is one of the most exciting things, I think, about therapeutic beekeeping, is that there's a whole world that extends around the apiary and reaches out into other areas, art, poetry, food, carpentry. There's all kinds of things that happen around that apiary. And so this is a picture of you, Mark, at one of the workshops on bee behavior you taught. This is the Hastings Folk Garden. And this is what happens. So really quickly, we have to slide back our trellises and make our apiary bigger. Sorry? Oh, hey, Jim. That's the urban farm, the Hastings Urban Farm. I don't even know what I said. It's the Hastings Urban Farm. And with our apiaries, this is what they look like in summer. So 20, 25 people all crowding around, professors and other experts coming in and working alongside then our beekeepers in the community, like Jim, who you just heard from, who then, Jim gets to teach, and he's an expert now too. So that inclusivity and that equality that happens in the apiary is really exciting. And it very quickly, who cares where you came from? Who cares what your shelter looked like last night, if you even had any? If you know about bees, you're respecting the bees, you're being a part of the bees, then we're all equals within the apiary. And that is an opportunity and an experience that's a privilege to have that opportunity to be an equal. It's not an opportunity that everyone gets every day. But inside of the apiary, it really is. I think the self-worth and the community pride that have sort of been touched on a couple of times, really, those are the things that are at the core of everything we're doing. Every program we build, every partnership we create, every project we take on feeds back into creating opportunities for building self-worth and for enhancing community pride. And this picture, I think that this is part of this spectrum of opportunity around the hive. This is a carpentry session, painting nukes. We also, we build all of our own frames. There's so much to do around the bees. There's really year-round work. And the experience of completing something that is functional, that is beautiful, that is going to go out into the world and be a part of something real, that is meaningful work. And the experience of meaningful work is something that, again, not everybody gets to do. I feel so lucky to feel that the work I'm doing is so meaningful. And part of that is that it creates meaningful work for other people, employment opportunities, skills, training, a chance for people to share skills they might already have, might never have been able to share, or might just have lapsed on for the last while. So in spaces like this, people get to be skilled, they get to be valued, and that experience comes back to that self-worth. It really is the experience that is at the core of Hives for Humanity. And I think I will leave it there, because that is the message, that if we can help people to develop self-worth, that's the thing that can start to build hope, that can change lives, and it's the thing, it's the magical thing. If we can get people feeling that they're worth it, that they're worth better healthcare, that they're worth eating better, that they're worth taking care of, that they're valued, that they're loved, that's the experience that can change lives and build hope. And I was thinking about that word hope earlier today, and thinking that really, for me, and I think with Hives for Humanity, hope is about feeling that your actions can have an impact in the world, on the people around you, on the other beings around you. And that experience of caring for the bees creates hope. And we've had feedback from our beekeepers, and there's two pieces that I'll share. And one is from one of our beekeepers, Ian, and he talks about the bees having given him hope where before he had none. He talks about the first day, the invitation to come be a part of the apiary at his residence under his door, and that was a pivotal moment in his life because it gave him hope that there was something he could contribute to and be a valued part of. And the other is something Jim said right after that first hive, which was, could have been brushed over. It could have been something that we just forgot about, but it was Jim saying, what about next year? What can we do next year? Can we split that one hive into 2 hives? What about the other gardens? What about the other residences? What about other places? What can we do? What will next year be like? And that hope for the future, that planning for the future, that belief that there is positive opportunity in the future, that's what we're driving for, and I think that's what's at the heart of Hives for Humanity. So thank you again for being here tonight, and I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Wow. There was so much profound in that, Sarah. The one thing that stood out for me in everything you said was one line you were talking about. Taking care of bees, we learn to take care of each other. Is that important? Yeah. And our next guest is also someone who takes care of bees, but takes care of them in a very different way than Sarah does. In the old days, there was beekeeping with honeybees, and then there was this tiny little fringe of people that were interested in wild bees that really didn't get a whole lot of attention. And one of the great things about, there's not a lot of great things about honeybees dying, but one of the things has been that those people interested in wild bees have now come into their own. And there is a huge, and I mean huge, presence now in the pollinator communities of people who are doing research and working hard around education and conservation and development of habitat that will help wild bees. Wild bees in the city, wild bees in agricultural areas, wild bees in the countryside have finally come into their own. And we are very fortunate here in Vancouver to have one of the real leaders of the wild bee community here with us in the city and with us tonight. Elizabeth Elle is professor and chair of the Department of Biological Sciences here at Simon Fraser University. It's been her academic home since January of 2000. She's not an entomologist, though. She did not start out working with bees. She's actually a botanist. And her interest in bees came from her interest in plants and in the interactions that pollinators had with the bees that she was working with the plants that she was working with. And bees have now become an increasingly important part of what she does, but not in isolation. She understands that bees can only be understood in the context of their environment. And so her background in botany has served her extremely well in the work she's doing with bees. Her research now focuses on the impact of human activities, urbanization, agriculture, cattle grazing, on the biodiversity of pollinators, and particularly how we can preserve pollination services to both wildflowers and crops in the face of the issues that are facing pollinators today. So we are truly fortunate to have Elizabeth with us. And I suppose technically I'm in the biology department, so technically she's my boss. So.
It's true. I started my career 20 years ago in pollination, working with plants, and nobody cared what I had to say. But I am now pretty much a bee person full time. Thank you. That and now I guess I'm interesting. I feel like I'm a bit of an outlier here today, though. But I have to also share Sarah's story. So I met actually her mom, Julia, before I met Sarah. I met Sarah just a year ago. We were both at the BC Honey Producers Association conference in the Okanagan. And it's the first time I got to hear her talk, like she talked to you today, about her passion and the beautiful work that she's doing here in the downtown east side. And it really changed a lot about how I think about honeybees. Because I am a wild bee person, and I tend to be a little dismissive of honeybees for that reason. And Sarah helped me see, this insect has become this mechanism for social change in a way that is profoundly beautiful. And I feel really honored that I'm even here today and that I know you. So this beautiful creature is the one that we're really here to talk about. That's the honeybee. And like I said, it's not, the bee that gets me really excited. I hate to admit that in this audience. They're really important for agriculture and for honey production. And what we're learning through Sarah's work is they're also important for social change. But they're only one of 20,000 species of bees on this planet. And most other kinds of bees are really different from honeybees. And I think it's awesome that Sarah wanted me to come and try to be even a teeny bit as inspiring as she is about what I do, which is wild bees. So I'm going to try to inspire you a little bit. And I'll start with just, I like showing pictures because when I started getting interested in bees, it's because I'm a naturalist. And I was out there saying, look at that, that's different. And I started to realize just how diverse our wild bees are. All of these photos were taken here in BC, some in my backyard. And I think a lot of you all know what a honeybee is. You probably even know what a bumblebee is. You may or may not know that the bumblebee in the center picture is the western bumblebee, which is highly endangered and may go extinct. You probably also didn't realize that they came in all these great colors. So that's kind of what I want to talk to you about. So 20,000 species of bees on the planet, 800 in Canada, 450 here in BC. That's more than there are birds in our whole country. Let's think about that for a minute. A lot of them. Okay, and actually, let me go back for a second. I'll give you a preamble. The next series of slides, the bee is always on the right. And what I want to do is just have you say, really? That's a bee? So, okay, because they don't always look like what you think they should look like. So they come in many different colors that you wouldn't expect, like this little red bee. Looks a lot like a wasp. So does this one, which looks a lot like a yellow jacket. This gorgeous green mason bee looks also like a green metallic wasp. Of course, the famous blue orchard mason bee, the blue orchard bee, on the right, sometimes when people put out bee condos for those and they don't know what they look like, and the first time they see one, they say, no, that's a fly. That's a bottlefly. No, it's not a blue bottlefly. That's a bee. Sometimes flies look like bees, so that's a great honeybee mimic also introduced from Europe. Sometimes a fly can even look like a bumblebee. Bet you didn't realize that. Huh? And they can be amazingly beautiful. Unfortunately, none of these are local. These are all tropical. They're in Australia and Central America. But oh my goodness, who knew that bees came in black and white polka dots? Much less, these gorgeous blues, right? They're inspiringly beautiful. There's also a lot of variation in size. I love this photo taken by Steve Bookman, who wrote The Forgotten Pollinators. And so that is the largest and the smallest bee in North America posed together. So that, and there's a size bar to the lower left, that's a millimeter. So the little bee, that's Perdita minima, that's a great name, is only 2 millimeters long. And it's posed on the head of a carpenter bee, which is about the size of my thumb. Now, we don't sadly have either of these species in BC, but we have other species of Perdita that are, huge, 2.5 millimeters. And some of our bumblebees would rival the carpenter bee in size. So, again, maybe testing your notions of what bees are like. But the one thing I can tell you about bees is they're vegetarians. And it's just a way for me to remember to say that the thing that makes a bee is that they are all about pollen and nectar. It's what they eat, that's what she's doing, but she's also collecting pollen and nectar to bring home. And in the case of the honeybee, that's how we get honey. But in the case of all bees, they're actually feeding their offspring some combination of pollen and nectar. And that's what makes them so great at pollinating, because they're visiting flowers so often because they need to be feeding those offspring. And most of our bees are not social. They're not like honeybees with a queen and lots of workers. The same person, Steve Bookman, once said to me, they're just single moms trying to get along. One mom trying to raise her offspring on her own. And so they have to work really hard to do that, to get enough pollen and nectar to do that. So how do you know if it's a bee or a fly or a wasp? Well, bees have 4 wings and flies have 2, if you get close enough to count. They're usually fuzzy. I showed you some examples where they're not so much, but they're fuzzy because that helps them with pollen collection. But I'm a scientist, remember. The main reason is that they're cute. Especially the one in the middle. The one in the middle is a male mason bee. That's a mustache that is to die for. Is he cute or what? And if you don't believe me, here's some pictures of wasps and flies from comparison. So if you look on the lower left at that yellow jacket, I'm sorry, that just looks meaner than the yellow and black one above it. Huh? Less cute. And the other wasps, they have their antennae really low on their faces. I think it makes them look really mean compared to bees. And of course, flies, they have those big bug eyes. I guess those are faces a mother could love, but I'm sorry. Bees are cuter. And I don't really want to diss them too much, because actually these other insects can be pollinators. They just don't visit flowers quite as often, and so they're not doing as much pollination. And that's because they do other things that we might like. Their offspring tend to be carnivores, so they'll eat things like caterpillars and aphids. So they provide great natural pest control in addition to being pollinators. So here's just a few photos, again, all taken locally, of flies and wasps and beetles. People know about butterflies and hummingbirds, but really they do a minor part of the work when we think about pollination. You might have heard that bees are responsible for 1 out of 3 bites you eat. Bees are important. It's not just honeybees, it's all bees, and even some other things. We have a little tiny gnat, a little fly, to thank for chocolate. So I thank that gnat an awful lot. All of these things can contribute to our food. And 90% of the plants on this planet need a pollinator in order to reproduce. So it's not just about us. It's also about food for bears and for birds. And it's about those natural ecosystems that need the plants to be able to reproduce, so that we have these amazing natural places that we have. Sarah said it would be great if I could say something about bees in Vancouver. We haven't worked here in downtown, but we've worked throughout Greater Vancouver sampling bees, and we found, all pollinators, we found 142 species in Metro Vancouver 2 years ago when we sampled in a number of parks. And about half of the species were bees, a quarter were flower flies, and the rest were a mix of wasps and butterflies and beetles and things. But when we counted up how many of the visits were done by each group, 90% were done by bees. But think about that number, 142. I don't know how many species are here in the downtown core, but there's probably a lot more than you think. One of the challenges, though, is that pollinators are in trouble. Mark mentioned this. And this is a graphic from the Canadian Geographic Wildlife issue of last December, and I was really pleased to be interviewed by Leslie Anthony for this article, because I thought it was about time that people were paying attention to the fact that insects are also in trouble. It's not just polar bears. I mean, we should worry about polar bears, but we should also worry about insects. And I'm just going to really briefly tell you why they're in trouble. There's 3 main reasons, and I'm going to go through each of these really quickly with you. So the first is disease. This is the main problem for honeybees. Honeybees have, there's mites, and there's fungal diseases, and there's viruses, and there's all sorts of things that affect honeybees. And one of the reasons it's so challenging is because as a managed bee that we use for pollination of our crops, we keep them often in very high densities. And so those sicknesses, the diseases, and the pests and parasites can easily move in those high densities. One of the other challenges, though, when we talk about wild bees, is the transfer of diseases from those managed bees to the wild bees. So this particular bumblebee, you see she has really stubby wings. She's got deformed wing virus. And unfortunately, in this case, this is from Europe, it was shown that she got that from managed honeybees kept nearby. And I don't want to paint honeybees as the bad guys here, because we also manage bumblebees, and long-distance movement of bumblebees has led to the introduction of diseases in new places, and that's a challenge. The second is pesticides. Pesticides are in the news a lot. I'm sure all of you have heard about the issues with pesticides. And we have a regulatory framework where, in most cases, when pesticides are used responsibly, it's not an issue. But the challenge is with some of the newer pesticides. You might have heard of neonicotinoids. The thing there is that they don't kill bees, which is what our regulatory framework is about. They actually can affect them neurologically. So it affects their ability to learn how to work a flower to get food from it, their ability to navigate to find food and to find their way home. And so that's going to have a big impact on the ability of a colony to grow, or even of these these wild bee populations to do well. But for wild bees, and for actually all plants and animals worldwide, the main reason why we are losing species is loss of habitat. And it's not, as many people automatically assume, through the development of cities. It's like this strawberry farm in California. It's the conversion of natural land to agricultural production to feed us. And that's challenging because we need to eat too, right? So why is that bad? Well, this strawberry farm, when it's in bloom, it's not a terrible place to be a bee. There's lots of flowers, right? There's lots of pollen and nectar, but it's only one kind. And that's not a very healthy diet. So what I like to use as an analogy is I personally love broccoli, and it's supposed to be good for you, right? If you only got to eat broccoli for 3 weeks, how well would you feel? That's what's happening to the bees. They're really nutritionally compromised in these landscapes. And of course, when the crop isn't blooming, it's a food desert. There's nothing at all to eat. And these three things interact. We know this best for honeybees. So we know, for example, that if a bee has been exposed to some pesticides, it's more likely to get sick if it's exposed to a disease agent. And we know that if it has a poor diet, it's less likely to recover. Sounds a lot like us, right? Just imagine if you're exposed to toxic chemicals and you're not eating very well, you're going to be more likely to get sick. Same thing for bees. The thing is, though, I always want to talk about good news stories. What can we do about this? Well, it's hard to say what we can do about diseases, honestly. It's with pesticides, well, the city of Vancouver has a ban on cosmetic pesticides, and if you don't live here in the city, I hope you will not use them on your own property that you have control over. I think we can make that choice. But the main way that everybody in this room can contribute, and the way actually Hives for Humanity contributes, is for habitat loss. The main thing that you can do is plant a garden. Now, this happens to be my front garden, which I've planted so that we've got things blooming already, and if they're going to bloom, there's going to be other things blooming in October. There's things blooming all the time in my garden. But you may not actually have access to this much space. That's okay. I Googled Vancouver balcony garden, and I found these photos. These can be amazing ways to support bee populations, amazing ways, if you pick the right flowers. And in the lower left, that's tomato plant. So food for bees is food for you, and which is something that Sarah said. The best thing you can do for pollinators, actually, is plant a garden, even if that garden is one pot on a balcony. It's really a good thing to do. If you're wondering how important this might be, there was a study that came out several years ago now that was assessing the health of honeybees. And they found that bees in the city of Paris were among the healthiest in Europe. And it's because in a city, they're not exposed to pesticides like they would be on a farm. They're not in high density like they would be on a farm. And honestly, they have a lovely, diverse diet. The bees here in Vancouver can also have a great life if we provide them with food. If you're wondering what to do, how to do that, well, we've been working on that in my lab. We've been working in people's gardens. We've been trying to figure out what are the most pollinator attractive plants out there. And we've now got lists, and in addition to these these things that maybe you recognize some of them. We've got lists on my website. I'm going to put my website up. But the trick is to look at it like a bee. You can see that something like a dandelion, or in the top, the Nootka rose or the thimbleberry, if you can see the pollen in there, it's probably good for bees because they can see it too. And that's the trick. Put on your bee eyes, and you're going to do something good. Or if you can go to a place where things are being grown, you just wait and you let the bees tell you. You see what they pick, and that's what you bring home. So my message today is something that Hives for Humanity already know, because they're already doing it in places like the Hastings Farm. If you want to do something good for the bees, what you need to do is plant a garden. Those websites have some information, and mine, like I said, has lists of species of plants that you can plant. Thanks for having me here, Sarah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. As you can see, she is a great resource for our community and has some great pictures, too. I'm going to talk with you a little bit now. I think what I'll be doing is I'm going to talk a little bit and read from my book, Bee Time. I haven't quite decided what to read yet, though. It's been such a rich evening already. I think I'll build on on what we've heard from Dean and Sarah and Elizabeth. I think I'll start with a little piece about mead, of all things. I think what I'll do is start with a little piece about mead, then I'll read you a little bit about bees in the city, and if we still have time, I'll finish with a little bit about Bee Time and where the title came from. I want to read you the section about mead, not so much because it's about mead, but because it's about people, and it's about the ways that bees, in this case mead, can bring people together. One of the occupational hazards of being a bee expert is that beekeepers often ask me to sample their honey and homemade mead. I've had a lot of pretty good honey, but haven't been so fortunate in the mead department. Mead can be pretty tough to quaff, whether store-bought or homegrown. It simply is not that easy to produce a superior honey wine. Those of us who are invariably polite tremble when the bottle of home brew is brought up from the basement, terrified that we are about to enter the undrinkable zone. The rarity of a good bottle of mead makes these experiences memorable. One remarkable example was sampled at my own table, poured from a bottle that had been in my basement for more than 10 years, and looked it. Covered with dust, a bit of mold growing on the top of the cork, a layer of turbid sediment at the bottom, it was labeled with a peeling piece of masking tape, proclaiming that this was Atkinson Mead by Harvey Boone, 1968. I had feared uncorking this bottle since the moment it was given to me as a gift, because the giver was John Boone, one of the nicest of gentlemen in a community not generally known for its gentleness, beekeepers. The mead maker was his father, Harvey, an icon in British Columbia beekeeping. John, a cardiologist, had given me this relic of Canadian beekeeping history after attending a course at the university where I was teaching. Harvey Boone was a founding father of beekeeping in British Columbia. Even today, a few generations after his time, he is still revered by our beekeepers. A trust fund that sponsors research and education was named in his honor. Ted Atkinson, a scientist in the Okanagan Valley fruit growing region, was recognized on the label because he provided Harvey with some apple concentrate to juice up the recipe. I kept putting off opening Boone's mead. A precious bit of beekeeping history lay in my basement, and I was deeply apprehensive that it would taste pretty much like it looked. Family celebrations came and went, as did innumerable guests from the beekeeping world who graced our table and would have appreciated the history behind the heirloom. Years passed. The bottle got dustier and dustier, but finally the perfect occasion arrived. It was August 2003, and our close apicultural friends, Don Dixon and his wife Jamie, were staying with us. My daughter, who was home from university, joined us at dinner. with her best friend from high school. Rounding out the table was Michael Young from Northern Ireland, a cook of considerable repute who oversees a culinary institute at which many of Ireland's finest chefs train. He also happens to be one of the world's premier mead makers. I had spent 2 nights at his home the month before, prior to speaking at an Irish Federation of Beekeepers event, in a large spare room filled with the trophies he had garnered for his mead. Harvey Boone's mead called from the basement. I dusted off the bottle as best I could, passed it over to Michael to open, and waited for my worst fears to be realized. The cork popped quietly. The tawny mead was poured into our best crystal aperitif glasses. The moment had come. It was sublime. Beyond sublime, it tasted like nothing I had ever experienced. Deep, rich, smooth, with a hint of the fruity honey and concentrate from which it was fermented. This was a brilliant bottle of mead. Humble its container may have looked, but within was a flavorful jewel, an experience worthy of the producer's exemplary reputation. Boone's mead is gone, but I kept the bottle as a reminder of a special night when good mates raised glasses to toast friendship and the achievements of a great beekeeper. It still holds the scent of Boone mead, an aromatic memory evoking a moment when beekeeping, past and present, gathered in our home. Thank you. Bees in the city have been dear to my heart for a number of reasons. I had a couple of students once who studied wild bees in the city and found pretty much the same number that Elizabeth has verified. But they were interested in more than wild bees. They were interested in education, conservation, just doing a really big project. And as a result of that project, that was certainly the predecessor of many of the programs supporting wild bees. Beekeeping has also taken off in cities. It used to be illegal up until about not so long ago, maybe only 5 or 6 years ago. Beekeeping was actually illegal in the city of Vancouver, which didn't mean that people didn't do it. There was one fellow I write about in my book. I will not name him, but he was a beekeeper from Surrey, very elderly, crusty guru of the Surrey beekeeper movement. And he owned a building down in Chinatown, and he kept 20 colonies of bees on the roof of his building. He painted the hives black, which is a really bad color for bees, but he painted them black so that the authorities wouldn't see them. And he would brag every year about how his bees brought home 400 pounds of honey for each colony. Amazing produce. And he would strut around at meetings, just saying, 400 pounds, guys, 400 pounds per colony. And everybody would look up at him and say, wow, you're amazing. And finally, somebody figured out, and they confronted him at a meeting and said, Mr. So-and-so, whose name I will not mention, did you know that your bees were only about 1 kilometer away from BC Sugar? And that was the end of his bragging about his bees. But whether your bees are near BC Sugar or not, honeybees do incredibly well in the city, as do wild bees. And I think for similar reasons. Few pesticides, long season of very diverse nectar and pollen sources, and actually a lot of wonderful space for bees. Backyard gardens, railroad right-of-ways, road right-of-ways, parks, formal gardens. There's really flowers everywhere, especially in Vancouver, and bees do very well. And bees do very well at bringing people together as well. We see bees in the downtown east side. We see bees on the roof of the Fairmont Waterfront Hotel, on the convention center. There's bees in Van Dusen Gardens. There's just honeybees all over the place, coexisting in a very healthy way with wild bees. So I want to read you just a little piece about the value of having bees in the city. Beekeeping with honeybees, combined with efforts to value and enhance wild bees, has become a significant aspect of urban culture. Whether for environmental, agricultural, or anti-poverty reasons, bees are now recognized as integral components of city habitats. Bees in the city provide a template, upon which to reflect on how to reconcile our human needs with those of the other species with which we share our planet, and on which we are dependent in so many ways. Bees fit well in the interstitial space between disturbed and natural habitats, thriving so long as forage, nesting sites, and a chemical-free habitat are available. Our challenge is to enhance habitats sufficiently to sustain both human endeavors and native species. Bees demonstrate that ecologically coherent cities and urban agriculture can be compatible, and suggest that a similarly balanced approach might also work well in rural ecosystems and farmland. Bees can help us not only bridge the natural to managed divide, but also straddle another deep division in North American society, rich versus poor. I was struck with how easily bees took me through diverse social and economic strata, from exclusive high-end hotels to comfortable middle-class neighborhoods to the most extreme poverty. By cutting across class and income, interest in bees is a great equalizer. Bee enthusiasts are united by a passion for maintaining ecologically healthy habitats, an interest in protecting the agricultural benefits bees provide through pollination, a fascination for the behavior of all bees, whether wild or managed, and respect for the hard work bees put into producing the honey and wax that beekeepers harvest. Bees also help resolve another conundrum for urban dwellers, the sense of isolation and lack of community that often afflicts cities. Bees connect residents to their neighbors, to other bee enthusiasts, and to the growing movement of urban gardeners and environmentalists. Common interests like bees build micro-communities that transform urban loneliness into that sense of belonging so fundamental to human happiness. That's the great lesson we can learn from urban bees. By pollinating flowers, bees literally connect one generation of plants to the next and guarantee the continuity of a healthy urban ecology. We too need to consider ourselves as connectors, part of a larger chain that passes on values and a sense of belonging to each other and to the generations to come. Bees have a way of doing that, reminding us that it's only together with nature that we can guarantee our own prosperity and survival, even in humanity's largest hive, the city. So I'm going to read one more short section, and I'm torn. I can read you a section about bee time and where the title comes from and my first experience with bees, or I can read you a section about honey. Preference? Honey? Honey it is. Oh. Both would take a little longer than, I don't want to take up too much program time. Where was the honey? This section has to do with my honey, actually, heavenly honey. I was just at a university banquet last night, and when I was producing, I no longer have apiaries. I had to close down my bee lab when I moved downtown to work at the Center for Dialogue. But before I closed the bee lab down, we used to give our heavenly honey out to, that was our name, heavenly honey. We used to give it out to every administrator in the university. And it was amazing how easily my time went at SFU. The chair of biology would get some, although you're started as chair probably too late for your jars. So last night at this banquet, the vice president of the university was talking about me a bit, and he was forlorn that he was no longer getting his jar of honey. In fact, he was more than forlorn. I think he was hinting that if there's any honey left at all in the world, he would like a jar. And when I closed down my lab, I did keep a private stash. And I am going to send him a jar of heavenly honey, so his forlornness will be cured. But this is a little piece about heavenly honey, but it's really about a lot more than heavenly honey. It's really about food and how we think about food and just the powerful way that bees and honey connect us all. For close to 30 years, we produced heavenly honey at the university where I was teaching, selling more than 10,000 pounds a year from up to 2,000 colonies. Our primary product was research data, but I'm a pretty fair beekeeper, and honey sales generated enough income to support a few scholarships each year. Our apiaries were out in the Fraser Valley, a gently rolling floodplain where the majestic Fraser River emerges from British Columbia's high mountains and steep canyons and flows to the complex estuary south of Vancouver, then out to the Straits of Georgia and the Pacific Ocean. It's a narrow, fertile valley about 60 miles long, with pastures supporting a thriving dairy industry up against the mountains, and extensive raspberry, blueberry, and cranberry fields and market gardens farther along in the Western Valley, closer to Vancouver. We were tutored in valley history, natural and human, by the honey it produced and the residents we encountered. We had our favorite apiaries, each with its own distinctive geological and floral character, as well as links to the early settlers from the past and quirky human inhabitants in the present. My favorite apiary was Florence's. A bee yard passed from best beekeeper in the valley to best beekeeper in the valley for close to 100 years. And as a young researcher just beginning my career, I considered it a deep honor to have it passed on to us. Florence herself had lived there for most of her life. She was in her 80s when we met, having raised her family in the ramshackle house she still inhabited. Now she lived on her own, husband deceased and children long gone, with an old black Labrador retriever and a cow she kept in the pasture next to our apiary. A stop to check in with Florence was mandatory on each visit. Somehow she always seemed to know we were coming and had tea ready with her freshly baked peanut butter cookies. Our bees were shaded under gnarled and spindly apple trees that, although abandoned for some time, had once been part of a producing orchard. Nearby were chicken and llama farms, but more important for the bees were the blueberry and raspberry fields, vegetable gardens, and a considerable amount of meadowland that provided dandelion, clover, fireweed, and other wildflower nectar sources for the bees. Maple trees dotted the landscape, providing the season's first serious nectar each April. Florence and the other landowners loved having the bees and the free buckets of honey we paid as rent each year, connecting them to their own land and providing an identity as the beekeeping landlords in their community. Our bees informed them about what was growing on their own and nearby property and evoked reflections about what had been there before. Sandwiches and cookies, as well as coffee on a cold day and cold drinks when it was hot, were shared, along with conversation about whatever fascinating things our bees were doing that day. Chats about bees were accented with local politics, the latest antics of strange neighbors, and the growing importance of conserving natural and farmed land as urban sprawl staked its tendrils into rural life. Our apiaries became local landmarks, inspiring directions to go about 3 minutes along such and such road and turn left at the first intersection after the bees. The owners' trips to the local stores were punctuated with their neighbors' queries about how the bees were doing and when the honey would be ready for sale. A jar of heavenly honey carried with it our gratitude to the bees for collaborating on the harvest, the flowers that yielded the nectar, the land itself, which provided a sense of physical place, and the human personalities, past and present, inhabiting that land. The core of what I learned from my 30 years of harvesting, bottling, selling, and giving away honey is this. Food at its best carries memories and reflections that go beyond sustenance to connect the personalities who harvest and the land from which they gather, making holy the simple act of eating. Thank you. I'll tell you one funny thing about writing. I wrote that whole chapter about honey, no problem. The last paragraph, I just couldn't figure it out. And I went about a month without knowing that the chapter hadn't ended. And you know, one morning I woke up and that last paragraph that I just read to you, word for word, 5 o'clock in the morning, right there in my head. I just wrote it down and that was that. Writing is such an amazing thing, isn't it? So we're going to wrap up the evening with a little bit of time for you to ask some questions to any of us, really. We have 2 people with microphones. And what I'd like to ask you to do is when you're recognized, wait till you have the microphone so that way everybody can hear your question. You're welcome to ask any of us questions or just ask a general question and somebody will answer. And I think what I'll do is go back and forth between the two sides so everybody gets a chance. We won't have time for that many questions. We'll try to wrap up by 8:30 so you can have some time to mingle and honey tasting. But we welcome any questions you may have. Yes, Sam.
I, for some reason, married into a family that's phobic about wasps and bees, so they swat a lot. So they buy those wasp traps. So do those capture bees, and are they bad things?
In my opinion, wasp traps completely useless. All they do is attract wasps. Depending on what they're baited with, they could catch a few bees. But my concern with them mostly is I don't think they're particularly effective.
They fill up with wasps, that's for sure.
Or they don't really discriminate particularly
That's
well.
what worries me, yeah.
Yeah, yep. So I would, and the other thing I'll tell you about wasps, I'm sorry, but wasps are beneficial insects.
Yeah.
Wasps, if we had more wasps in the world, we would need fewer pesticides. Wasps are predators and scavengers. They eat a lot of pest insects. And every August I get the same phone call from the media. We've heard that this is the worst year ever for wasps. Well, every year is the worst year ever for wasps because we forget the last year. And I tell people the same thing. You know, unless you have a wasp nest hanging in front of your front door and your 3-year-old kids are getting stung, just leave it because they're beneficial insects. And at the end of the year, they're going to disappear, and you can go back to living. So,
can I ask a quick question? One of the things that I've been looking at lately is how corals under the water fluoresce in that. And I've started reading about more and more plants that actually fluoresce. And I was just wondering, when there are many, it looks like they have compound eyes, what do they see? Are there colors that mean more to bees? And I noticed you were talking about how you plant flowers that will bloom from February right through. But I'm just interested in the bees' eyes and what they see when they come up to a flower.
Well, so bees can see in the ultraviolet, which is super awesome. And so sometimes a flower that just looks plain yellow to us has a big blue bullseye in the middle to a bee. But we'd have to put all these flowers under UV light to figure out what it is likely that the bees are seeing. But yeah, they can see things that we can't. And usually it's kind of like little arrows in the middle of the flower saying, "Here's the good stuff, girls," right? And yeah, so it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Somebody over here had a question.
Thank you.
And then
Great talk tonight, everybody. I see your slide about the best way to help the bees, which is planting a garden, but is there anything else you can say? I mean, I live in a condo in the West End, and I have a teeny tiny little one-planter spot, and I feel like that's not maybe I'm definitely going to do that, but what else would you suggest? What are some other steps you could say that you could do tomorrow to help the bees?
Well, so get all your neighbors to also use that teeny tiny spot for a pot of flowers, and collectively, it's a lot, right? I think that is one of the main, I think it is the best thing that you can do. And the other thing I would say is to try to get involved with groups like Sarah's or with community gardens that are trying to develop habitat for bees is the other big thing you can do. So, but yeah, maybe your one pot isn't that much, but just think if your whole condo community did it. That would be exciting.
Thank you.
And for those of you that have lawns, please stop mowing them.
Yes.
Let the dandelions grow, let the clover grow. It's fabulous food for bees. We have one.
Hi, this is for Dr. Elle. Would there be an impromptu collection of volunteers under guidance that might be interested in identifying a collection of mixed insects coming out of hibernation on a 2-week, maybe 1-week period, continuous for another month or so from Mission, BC? There's a little church that has an amazing collection. Several years ago, I found ladybugs of all colors, black, white, and everything in between, spots, no spots, elongated bodies, etc. The same, I believe there's some pollinators. The bumblebees are very friendly. They don't bite. Is it possible to get together a collection of people that would be willing to either A, identify the collection, or continue to collect and pass on the knowledge?
I'd love to talk to you. So we'll see what we can do to help you out. So
Thanks so
make
much.
sure we connect. I'll give you my card.
There's a project in the United States, I think it's called the Sunflower Project, where one day, every summer, for 1 hour, all across the United States, they get together thousands of volunteers to collect every bee they can on sunflowers or as closely related a flower as they can. And it's citizen science designed to sample across the United States and over many years to get a picture of what's happening with wild bees. I don't think there's anything like that in Canada, is there? No. But it's a cool project. So do we have a question on this side? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. We have a piece of land on the Sunshine Coast. It's where we've got an orchard and a garden and lots of rhododendrons, about 200. And we noticed that a lot of the bees go to the rhododendrons, and we'd like to raise bees, but we've heard that honey from from bees that have been feeding on the rhododendrons, some of the rhododendrons can be poisonous. Do you know anything about that?
Looks like I'm going to answer that one. Did you want to answer, Sarah? No, I can answer this. There is, some rhododendron honey is toxic, either to bees or to people. In Nepal, where rhododendrons came from, where there's gazillion rhododendrons, there's something like 200 deaths a year due to rhododendron honey poisoning. But having said that, in British Columbia, you don't really need to worry. There's not enough rhododendrons of a toxic type to worry about. And whatever rhododendron honey there may be, it's diluted sufficiently that there's no evidence that it's of any health risk to either people or to bees. So I wouldn't worry. I'd plant your rhodos and enjoy them. Yeah, she's got the mic, so I'll let her.
I'd like to ask a question. Global warming and with the Africanized bees down in South America coming up to Canada and all that, when they pollen or when they get together and all that or do their thing, do they have the intensity and still the aggravation of the Africanized bees? And, would they come up here in Canada since global warming?
So far, not to worry. The bees, I did my PhD on the killer bees in South America. I, believe it or not, July 1977, I was the cover story of Rolling Stone magazine. I'll tell you, it's been a weird life. That's a long story, though. I think I write about it in the book. It's quite a funny story. But the African bee is very much a tropical bee. It's spread up to the very southern United States, Florida, Texas, along Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California. And so far, their spread has halted. As climate changes, they may continue to spread a little bit further north. But it's extremely unlikely that they'll get up to Canada because they are very much a tropical bee. And the bees that have gotten into the United States don't appear to be quite as aggressive as the ones that started out. So not a lot to worry about for Canadians. We'll just take we have time for a few more. Now, is there one on this side? No questions on that side? So we have a couple of questions up here. This woman had a question, and then did you give? Okay, the fellow in the back.
I just wanted to pick up on the
microphone.
Toxicity of plants, and are there regulations in terms of testing honey that is sold? Take it away.
I don't want to answer all the questions. The question was about regulations for honey being tested. Yes, there are. Is it tested enough? No, it's not. The largest food fraud case in American history had to do with honey. $80 million of contaminated honey that was brought in from China, some contaminated with pesticides, that really wicked pesticides that are banned for use in most of the intelligent world. and some things that weren't even honey, like corn syrup. Huge case, $80 million, big American honey packers were involved. Haven't had quite so many problems in Canada, but I really encourage all of you to buy local. If you want to be sure that your honey is safe, not contaminated with anything, know your local beekeeper and buy local. Because we really don't do enough honey testing in Canada. And beekeepers, some beekeepers put a lot of things in their hives as pesticides and antibiotics that you really don't want to have in your honey. So local is always good. Now, there was a question in the back there, and then we'll...
Yeah. I'm a beekeeper in Kitsilano. I've got about 4 hives there. And every year there's more and more hives moving into Kitsilano. And I wanted to know if every property in Vancouver had 2 hives, has anybody ever done any studies to say what the forage capacity is of Vancouver's parks and gardens? Or just what do you think out of the top of your head, knowing about bees? Would there be a limit of the number of beehives in Vancouver?
One of you guys want to answer?
So I think it's unlikely that everybody's going to start keeping bees. I don't think that your hypothetical situation is too realistic. I do think that there would be some pressure if every person kept 2 colonies. I think that there would be issues, frankly, because we know that there's competition, but I don't think it's super likely. So there haven't been studies on it, but I don't think you have to worry about it either.
Yeah, we haven't reached that point yet.
No.
I think we're a long ways away from it.
Very far away.
You would know it pretty quickly because you wouldn't be getting any honey production.
Exactly.
And Elizabeth wouldn't be seeing any wild bees.
That's right.
And because the wild bees are so robust in the city, and beekeepers produce a lot of honey in the city,
Yeah.
I think we're still fine.
We're a long ways off. We don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. There was a question down here.
I've come to a lot of meetings, and I'm hearing a lot about how lucky we are to be in Vancouver, where we have habitat protection from our council. However, at this very moment, they are considering widening Malkin Avenue as one of the best solutions to a route after they take the viaducts down to the port. So Malkin Avenue goes right beside Cottonwood Community Garden. So they would be destroying a 20-year-old permaculture site with an apiary and Strathcona Community Garden as well. So I'm requesting that everybody keep that in their minds, that if you have an opportunity to state your opinion about saving Cottonwood and Strathcona, please take it. The other thing is that Cottonwood Community Garden has plots right now, lovely plots. We're looking for people to take those plots. And I don't know. Oh yeah, we also require 4 hours a month of work because we have a very large common area. And of course we want to feed our bees.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this side? We have time for just maybe 2 or 3 more in the back there. Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out and talking to us tonight. Thank you very much. I know there's probably a lot of beekeepers and honey harvesters here, and I just wanted actually everyone's opinion on the panel, and anyone else in the audience too, about the ethics of honey harvesting and the stresses that it puts on bees and kind of the ethics around that.
Well, I'll start. I think it's totally something we think about. We think really carefully about the stresses we're putting on bees, and I think that stress, much like for humans, is one of the biggest factors in health of these colonies. So one of the ways that we beekeep, we talk about therapeutic beekeeping, and that means that we move really slowly. It means that we take a lot of care with our bees. We're not slamming hives, we're not crushing bees. And then we only take what is the excess that has been produced. So we're very careful to leave our bees with enough honey that they can get through the winter, but more importantly, actually get through the spring. And then I think that honey is a way of sharing the story. And so, that's that harvest, then we get to share that honey and we get to share that story about the plight of the bees, the wild and managed, and share that pride in what they do and what is in our communities. So, yeah, that's that's what I have to say.
Anyone else?
No, I just want to, I just reminded me of something, of an anecdote about our garden and the very first year that Sarah got it going. Most of the people in downtown East Side, the only time they're on time is when they're meeting their dope dealer. And about 2 or 3 weeks into, I was always at work, and Sarah would go, well, it's Thursday afternoon, I have to go, and I'm going to be at this thing. So one day I was walking by, and she met everybody at 2 o'clock. There was a lineup of street and trench junkies at 1:30 to get to work with Sarah and the bees. And it just amazed me that people whose lives are so chaotic that it's very, very hard for them to even make their methadone or doctor's appointments, things that actually keep them alive. But they made sure that they were there a half an hour early so that they could be part of the program that Sarah runs. And that alone just floored me, and I just wanted to let everybody know on that anecdote. It was just, thank you, Sarah.
Maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up. We have a question over here.
I'm glad that you brought up the concept, like the narrative and story. And I guess my question for on the social side of things, for Dean and maybe Sarah and you guys, you think, what type of social and systemic changes would be needed for there to be more awareness around Vancouver so that people could share this story that's going on, this like, you know, crew of people that we have in here to like have that unfold exponentially. And so what's, in your experience?
Well, one thing is we got to get rid of the province newspaper. The only thing they write about is how many deaths there are or how we've transferred diseases to everybody else. That's all they ever write about. It just pisses me off that when something bad goes on in our neighborhood, they are scratching at my door, they're phoning me up. But for something like this, the province should be here taking pictures, and we should be on the front page of the paper on a story like this. And until that happens, nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I think I'll add, I think one of the most powerful things we can do is really say hello to everyone. And Dean spoke about that, knowing the people in your community, saying hi to them in your elevator, on your stairs, in your community garden. And I think doing that starts, we start to recognize the humanity that is common to all of us. And if we do that, then I think we start sharing stories and we start realizing how interconnected we all are, both, with all the people in our communities and all of the beings, the bees, the beetles, the birds, the plants, the soil, the air. It's all so much a part of everything. And by starting to say hello to everyone, looking up, and I think that's when people talk about the downtown east side, that's the story that doesn't get shared. But when you walk down the street in this community, you say hi to the people you know, and you say hi to the people you don't know, and you smile, and that's powerful. And I think that systemically, if we could encourage, by doing that, if we could encourage others to do that all over Vancouver, we might experience less of this isolation that puts people back into sort of depression and like hides people away from community. If we could start all saying hello and really acknowledging each other for the humans that we are, without seeing the labels that we so often place on each other. I think that's the change I'd like to see. So.
The province newspaper may be self-destructing on its own. So.
It just bothers me that when we have really good stories, and there's lots of them in the downtown side, this isn't the only thing that Sarah's done, but she's led a number of projects at the Drug User Resource, led a number of projects at and they never seem to make any headlines. And yet they're really cool things that are happening with a bunch of people that everybody thinks just should be jailed or thrown away. And look, she's even gone to the prisons, and they're starting to construct some of these what do you call them, Oh, but that's incredible. So, and there's a real connection. There's one thing we all know on the downtown east side is where the jail is, and so to be able to carry our profession from the garden over to the jailhouse is always worthwhile.
Okay, what a marvelous evening it's been. And, the title of tonight was People and Pollinators. And we've certainly talked a lot about pollinators, but I think you've seen the incredible value that pollinators have brought to connecting people. After we wrap up, there's honey tasting in the back. There's some snacks. We encourage you to stay and mingle and talk bees, talk people. I want to wrap up by thanking Simon Fraser University for hosting the event tonight, Hives for Humanity certainly for bringing us all together, and I would like you to join me particularly in thanking three extraordinary people, Dean, Elizabeth, and Sarah, who each got up tonight and just talked most eloquently about themselves, about bees, about community, and about taking care of each other. And it's been marvelous to have a chance to listen to the three of you. So stay, mingle, have some chow, and thanks for coming.